It's the only box of chocolates prop in the programme. So yeah, you probably should have figured out what this one's all about. It's a Not Brand X. Thank you, Bruce. And it's about that most generic of gifts, Cadbury's milk tray. This episode is also a sort of indirect tribute to the legendary Alan Hawkshaw, stock musician in extraordinary, famed throughout the lands for his themes for adverts and programmes. His most famous work was probably Chicken Man, the theme for Grange Hill. Oops, wrong clip. Yes, that's the trouble with making library music. Any sod can grab it and use it for any purpose, as long as they can pay the license. So you might end up with the same searching brass-led melody used for the news, and to promote some Western movie on VHS.
Some called him preacher. Others called him gunfighter.
Still, it all goes down the same hole. The cash, I mean.
Clint Eastwood, Tail Rider.
Another famous piece is the one you heard a bit of a minute ago. The Knight Rider. Best known as the theme to Cadbury's milk tray. Hawkshaw didn't actually compose that one. It was Cliff Adams, the evil mastermind behind the unearthly Sing Something Simple, one of the most horrible radio programs ever made. Fortunately, it's an instrumental, so there's no lyrics to be sung with eerily immaculate diction and harmony by a chorus of apparently dead people, which is what happened on the show. Indeed, all that happened on the show. Anyway, the connection with Hawkshaw is that he played piano on the original version, and later released his own arrangement as a single. Didn't bother the charts any, but it's probably the definitive version, just as Delia Derbyshire's is the definitive version of Ron Grainer's Doctor Who theme. Hawkshaw died in October at the reasonably ripe old age of 84, and millions of Britons suddenly felt a great chunk of their past detach itself like an iceberg, without really knowing why. So that's one excuse for going on about these things. Also, Christmas is around 2 or 3 corners, so if you have a significant other and no imagination, take this as a reminder to learn something about their personality and interests, goddammit. Milk Tray, then. One of the oldest extant confectionery brands, if not the oldest, having lasted over a century by now. Not the original assortment, but easily the most successful, if only by longevity. Sold throughout the Commonwealth and also technically in America, although for some reason only in New York.
New York City!
Shut up. Since World War I, it's been one of the great gifts for those who want to say, I harbour ambitions of seeing you naked the world over. Not to mention the second most popular message, despite seeing you naked on a regular basis, I know nothing about your interests. Right alongside the likes of Terry's All Gold, Roundtree's Black Magic, and Mattison's All Pork Assortment, including such enduring favourites as the Scratching Deluxe, the Big Pink One, and the Salami Penny. All highly popular from the past to the present, apart from the Mattison's one, which I just made up. Milk Tray, however, became truly iconic in the late 60s, when they started their most famous campaign. You know what was popular in the late 60s? This asshole. Yes, James Bond, 5 Connery-packed films in, was the biggest douchebag in the world. The absolute last word, the cool, awesome, and even radical. Everything was ripping off him in some way, and would continue to do so for decades to come. The difference here being that in 1968 it was still relatively fresh. Bond was a relatively young phenomenon. Ripping it off for your advert or whatever could hardly be called original, but it was at least distinctive and contemporary in a way it would never quite be again. Which is where the Milk Tray Man comes in.
because the lady loves milk tray.
I don't know if that was the first one, but it's in black and white, so it's one of the first. The pattern is set, though. A ludicrously square-jawed man in a black polo neck going to extraordinary lengths to deliver a box of chocolates for reasons vaguely explained by the great Petunia Winegum. I mean Peter Wingard. The actual setup itself is probably best not thought about. At the start, he's driving along his convertible with the briefcase full of chocs, and then, much to his shock, a helicopter aeroplane shows up and snatches him away to the actual target, which turns out to be over a body of water. Why didn't he just take the helicopter in the first place? Save having to write off the car when it inevitably smashes into a tree or something, assuming it doesn't kill anyone on the way. Like I said, you're probably not supposed to actually think about it for any length of time. Interestingly, we don't actually see the lady herself. We very rarely did. It's all about the delivery boy, who would come to be known rather unimaginatively as the Milk Tray Man. This particular guy with the muffiny chest and square head is called Gary Myers. He's an Australian model, a fact which is probably responsible for the urban myth that he's actually George Lazenby, who is also that thing. But no, Lazenby never did Milk Tray. From 1968 to 84, it was Gary Myers all the way in the black polo neck. Incidentally, I'm aware that what I'm wearing is a tuxedo. The only polo neck costume in this program doesn't actually come in black. We make compromises. So over the years, Myers was just a great and total bloody hero in various ways. Here's one of his first colour escapades, which isn't even pretending it's not a Bond ripoff. Never mind that daft bent, he's about to pick a knife fight with a shark. I want to see that. Again, we don't see her, but it must be some goddamn lady to be worth jumping into shark-infested waters twice, once off a jagged cliff, just to make sure she gets some nice chocolates. One of Myers' most famous exploits was around the same time when he outraced an avalanche.
Because the lady loves Milk Tray.
It seems less heroic if you consider that he'd probably caused the avalanche in the first place, stomping about, and that without it, this would actually be one of the more straightforward delivery jobs he'd ever done. Certainly compared with this one from a couple of years later.
And all because the lady loves Milk Tray.
Notice how it's getting ever so slightly less Bondish as time goes by. Not that Bond wasn't still popular, it just wasn't as fresh and finger on the pulse contemporary as it had been when Myers started this pointless job. And not that this isn't still basically a Bond action sequence, complete with Hawkshaw's John Barry impression, but it's altogether grittier in execution and setting than Bond would usually bother with. Wolves, wilderness, rickety footbridges, mud. And this one from the late 70s is clearly firing its grappling hook at a very different bandwagon, the mafia craze of the latter half of that decade that emerged in the wake of The Godfather.
the lady loves milk tray.
By the early 80s, Myers was starting to repeat himself somewhat. More skiing, ho-hum. At least this time he didn't start an avalanche. More evidence of poor reconnaissance, though. He's got himself all the way out there, only for the lady to be down and all. Still, nothing an heroic plummet can't solve.
And all because the lady loves milk tray.
By 1984, Myers was in his 40s and started to look a bit more like James Bond's dad, which in this day and age would probably still be fine, but Cadbury's wanted a younger, smoother model. I mean, it can't be because he couldn't do the stunts anymore, because he never did the stunts. He's a model, not a stuntman. This here? That's Alf Joint, stunt double for Connery in Goldfinger. Anyway, whether he retired or was retired from the role, 1984 was Gary Myers' last year in the polo-necked. His replacement was the younger, leaner, more insouciant-looking James Coons, a sort of Roger Moore to Myers' Connery. He made his debut in 1987, and you can tell.
And all because the lady loves milk tray.
Myers' adverts still look like Bond movies, but increasingly the Bond movies of at least a decade earlier. Shot on film, camera work at a relative distance, more about the impressiveness of the stunts than adrenalising the audience themselves. Coons' first milk tray ad was more of a roller coaster. High gloss, bright lights, heavy stylisation, gadgetry, and none more 80s synth pop arrangement of the theme. Even Petunia has been replaced with Tim Pigott-Smith. There's irony in the fact that Coons' debut coincided with that of Timothy Dalton as Bond, who was ostensibly eschewing the gloss and gadgetry right when Milk Tray was leaning into it. But it's not as if the two franchises cared about each other in any way. Sure about the music, though. Hawkshaw's definitely on the outs at this point, in favour of some hyper-contemporary to the point of being extremely dated now, electronically augmented saxophone and fake pan flute. It was fashionable at the time. It got worse with Coons' second go-round, however.
And all because the lady loves Cadbury's milk tray.
That solo just needs David Coverdale screaming about the size of his balls to be complete. By now the series had gone on long enough that clambering onto an aeroplane in flight, breaking in, dropping off a box of chocolates and plummeting parachuteless into the Pacific Ocean actually felt kind of routine. Which is an achievement in itself if you think about it. By now it's the 90s though. Cinematic style and film theory has long since broken into advertising. If the stunts aren't particularly impressive anymore, let's retreat into abstraction and pure style. Cadbury's had already started jacking up a sultry, artsy image for some of their more adult-oriented products. She's got a tongue! So it was an obvious choice to bring that to Milk Tray. And thus it was that we were actually introduced to the lady for the first time.
because the lady loves Cadbury's milk tray.
One of the more straightforward jobs, really. It would be if he knew how to fly a helicopter, which he clearly does not. The focus isn't on the action this time, but on creating a mood and ambience to associate with the product. Class, luxury, bit of romance, that sort of thing. Abstraction hit a giddy and confusing height in 1994, which saw them abandon James Bond, action tropes, and indeed the real world itself altogether, with this more or less entirely symbolic entry.
And all because the lady loves Cadbury's milk tray.
That's not how you play chess. I do like that it ends with neither slogan nor pack shot. Wouldn't happen now, because your Magic Sky Plus Q Impossible O-Vision boxes, with their ability to skip the adverts for you, have forced advertisers to use massive glowing words and logos and pack shots that could be seen on fast forward, albeit only for a nanosecond, in a form of accidental subliminal programming. And thus, Max Headroom turns out to have been a prophet. I don't know who that is in the costume, though. Could be James Coons. At that point it seems to fall away, ironically, given Bond's comeback just a year after the chess thing. The next proper appearance of the, or a, milk tray man that I could find comes from the early aughties and is a different barrel of lime altogether. Starting with the new protagonist, one Alex Riley of Kidderminster, so it's just as well he doesn't open his mouth.
Where do you think you're going?
This man is unique, and not just because he only appeared in this one. He's some sort of light meta-commentary on the whole trope. Yet, by 2003, it had been around too long to play it completely straight anymore. Fortunately, this isn't a complete ironic remake or anything, it's just sort of shyly winking to the audience about the campaign's past. Despite what's perhaps the most explicitly Bondian arrangement of the theme tune so far, which is saying something, this guy doesn't appear to be a spy. He doesn't even wear the polo neck. Notably, he is wearing a suit, but lots of people wear suits. Probably just a waiter. That's my theory. He's a waiter, or possibly a valet, and also a freelance celebrity stalker who happens across the Anaguillery and immediately fixates on her. And then everything after this bit plays out in his head while he's getting the shit kicked out of him by those huge bouncers. Especially this part.
Where do you think you're going?
It's not a particularly glorious ending for the milk tray man. Fortunately, it wasn't the ending. Just the last the world heard of him for 13 years, before James Coons returned as a silver fox for the brand centenary, launching some kind of national search for his long-term replacement.
And all because the lady
loves milk tray.
And just look at what we did to show her we cared. Now it's time for a new hero to deliver the famous box. Is it you? The search is on. New milk tray man, step forward.
Crazy stalker milk tray man appears to have been scrubbed from the record, I notice. The role is now occupied by a lean, dimple-chinned Scouse firefighter named Patrick McBride. Although what with the plague and all, he hasn't done a huge amount yet. Mostly just putting up with this pillock.
Just call me Milk Tray Man. Or Milky. The Tray. MTM. Milk Tray Man's fine.
This is the face of a man who'd rather be in a fire. So the milk tray man is still going strong, at least in theory. Sadly, Alan Hawkshaw isn't. But both legacies are secure. Milk tray man is a dangerous, obsessive, limerent James Bond, and Hawkshaw is one of the greats of the era when people knew what to do with a harpsichord, a flugelhorn, and a big bass drum. Get the fuck down. You've been watching a Bob the Fish production. Thanks! If you haven't found it already, be sure to check out our website at bobthefish.org.uk. Literally hundreds of videos not unlike this one that will make you laugh, think and realise new things or your money back. Which works out great because they're all absolutely free. All of this is possible thanks to the not unique way that Bob the Fish productions are paid for by you, the viewing public, via Patreon. For a donation of as little as £1 a month, not only do you ensure that I still have food and shelter so I can carry on making these programmes, but you could become eligible for a whole host of cool extras. New video essays, special event live streams, all my content a week in advance, and my book on the history of the BBC, Rule the Waves, chapter by chapter as it's written. And some cake, if you go out and buy a cake and eat it while you're watching. And if you don't want to support on a monthly basis, you can make a one-off donation via Coffee. It all helps stave off scurvy. bobthefish.org.uk. You make it what it is.